Shalom, I'm Nama Rue. This is Rabbi David Rue talking about Shmita. We are in 5782, the year on the Jewish calendar, and it is the seventh year of a 7-year cycle, which is the Shemitah year when the land rests. And I would like to find out some more about if it's a Torah prohibition, the kind of work that you're not allowed to do relating to the land and growing food during the Shemitah year. So most of what we're getting in the current era is actually rabbinic interpretation, rabbinic conclusion about what is and is not permitted. But I know that the Torah laws are more binding. So can you explain some more about how we navigate this?
Well, we looked at last time a little bit about the difference between a kumei lana and a fruyei lana, allowing something to continue to exist and making something better. And there are only 4 things that the Torah specifically prohibits. The rest are rabbinic, although there may be a Torah requirement for the rabbis to establish these things. But as we look at it, we saw that there was a debate between the Ritva and Rashi as to whether this isn't something that's prohibited at all, and therefore I don't have to try and do it before Shemitah begins, or there is a prohibition. It's just if the tree's going to die or something's going to create a great loss, then in that circumstance I might be able to do it even on Shemitah. So the question is, how does this work in general? The first Mishnah in Moed Cotton begins, Mashkin in במועד ובשביעית, a field that requires irrigation. I'm allowed to irrigate it both in Chol Moed and Shemitah. There's more to this Mishnah, which in the sources you can look at. That's all we need for this instant. Now, the Gemara looks at that in Moed Cotton, same place, and says, Tznan, we learned in our Mishnah, Mashkin השלחין במועד ובשביעית, we're allowed to water our fields on both Moed and Shmita. בשלמא מועד משום טירחא. I understand the problem on Moed would be it's a טירחא, and I'm not supposed to schlep on Chol Moed. It's supposed to be set aside as Yom Tov. ובמקום פסדה sharu rabbanan. And when there would be a loss, one of the 5 categories of things that the rabbis permitted on Chol Moed was a loss. And so would be a loss. The crops would be damaged or die completely, and therefore you can water them on Chol Moed. Ela shvis, but on Shmita, bein laman to us or mishum Azraya, it wouldn't matter whether you say watering is a prohibition of planting, ubein laman to omer mishum choresh, or whether you say it's a prohibition of plowing. Azraya v'charisha b'shvis mishari. You're not allowed to plow and plant on Shmita. It doesn't. Amar Abai b'shvis b'zman hazeh. Abai says we're only talking about Shemitah in our times when Shemitah is rabbinic. Therefore, the rabbis had the ability not to prohibit these things if there would be a loss. But Abai would hold, when Shemitah will again be from Torah law, you won't be able to water your field at all on Shemitah. Rava Amar, Rava disagrees. Afilu temer rabbanan, even according to the rabbis, avos asaru, machmana toldos lo asar rachmana. It's only the primary Torah prohibitions that those things that are mentioned in the Torah that are prohibited. The rabbinic, all the extensions of those things aren't necessarily prohibited. Dichsiv, ubeshna shvis Shabbat Shabbason yeh la'aretz. It says the 7th year will be a year of rest for the land. Sadcha lo tizra, you will not plant your field. So it's mikdiz mira beklal zriya. So I understand that pruning is part of planting, and it's mentioned. Ubetzira beklal katzira, and harvesting of grapes is part of the general harvest. Lemay hilchas ksvi rachmana. So why did the Torah write it? Lemeimar ahani told us mechayev, ahacharinaita lo mechayev. To tell you that on these specific things you're liable and on no others. So therefore, the on all the other toldos where there is no chiyuv, there is no Torah prohibition of doing this, or there's a limited Torah prohibition, not of the same intensity. Therefore, we're allowed to do other things. We're allowed to, in the case of loss, do these things that are not the 4 things mentioned in Chumash that are prohibited during the Shmita. Now, normally we have a principle, halacha Abaye biyal kagam. There are 6 cases where we say in a machlokas Abaye and Rava, the halacha is like Abaye. And this does not seem to be one of them. So you would expect the halacha to be universally accepted like Abaye. Having said that, the Mabig, who we've run across many times, because he is the one that holds that produce grown on non-Jewish land in the Shemitah year still has the sanctity of Shemitah because the land is holy, whether or not it's owned by a Jew or not. And he is also the first one, by the way, to come up with Heter Mehira about 500 years ago, a little more than 500 years ago. He holds that halacha l'maisa, the reason why we're allowed to do things other than the 4 principal things mentioned in the Chumash is because Shmita is a d'Rabbanan. And there is a general principle that we do not put one rabbinic thing on top of another. And therefore, this doesn't apply at all, and we're fine on doing everything except those 4 things. Having said that, Rav Kook and Shabbos Haaretz in the Kuntres HaAchron and the Chazon Ish are both strict and say it's not because of that. It's because of the loss factor, and therefore, as we said last time, anything that you can do before Shemitah, you must do before Shemitah. Now, even though ein goes from gezerah l'gezerah, the rabbis don't put one rabbinic decree on another. There are times when what might look like that is in fact not. For instance, according to most Tanaim, the prohibition of eating fowl, birds, with milk is rabbinic. The fact that we have to wait between milk and meat has a hint to the Torah, but that's also, so to speak, rabbinic in nature. Or if you want to say, putting them both on the same table. You're not supposed to, unless you have something distinguishing, you're not supposed to put milk and meat on the same table. Nonetheless, this prohibition also occurs concerning birds, concerning fowl, the same way it does with everything else. So this question is raised by almost all the Mefarshim and Shulchan Aruch and Yeridea, and they all say that the reason is because the 2 prohibitions were enacted entirely separately. When the prohibition against, let's say, fowl was created, the prohibition of not putting meat and dairy on the same table already existed. So when they enacted with the fowl, they enacted it concerning everything that already existed concerning meat. So it's not one gezerah on top of another. It's just when the second gezerah occurs, it also occurs the same way as everything for the Torah gezerah occurs. So too, long before Shemitah was d'Rabbanan, the rabbis had established that there are these other things that we must do to let the land rest. To fulfill the positive mitzvah of letting the land rest, we have to do all these other things as well. So when the rabbis said that even though there's no obligation in Shemitah from the Torah anymore, nonetheless we're going to keep it for a rabbinic reason, the exact way we kept it for the Torah, we keep it from the rabbis. There may be times when we can be lenient on an Isser d'Rabbanan, but that's because of the nature of an Isser d'Rabbanan and the questions asked. And sometimes you can put several things together, including the fact that this is Shmita in our time is only d'Rabbanan. But the fact is, when they established Shmita, the rabbinic Shmita, they established it exactly the same way as the Torah, as Shmita is kept when the Torah is done. One of the reasons given for this is that, for instance, this is mentioned explicitly by Chadash. Before the korban Omer is brought on the 16th of Nisan, you're not allowed to eat any of the new grain for that year. If it was previously harvested, we have to wait until the carbon Omer is brought on the 16th of Nisan. So, really, if we can't bring a carbon Omer, it's prohibited at daybreak. All right? Excuse me, it's permitted at daybreak.
Okay.
And so, but Rabban Gamliel said, listen, what's going to happen is the temple is going to be built. And people are going to say, last year I ate Chadash at daybreak. So this year I can also eat Chadash by daybreak. And they won't remember the fact that the only reason I could eat Chadash at daybreak is because there would not have been a carbon, there was no possibility of bringing the carbon Omer. But this year when the carbon Omer is brought, let's say it's not going to be brought until 8 a.m. or 6 a.m. And you daven in the Fasiking Minyan and you're making Kiddush before that, before the carbon Omer is brought. So, it's horrible. You're now eating the cake that you're not allowed to eat yet.
So what do they call that? Like a fence around the law?
It's a type of siyag, but we're doing this so that you'll be able to, one of the reasons, for instance, the Ramban says the only reason why you keep mitzvahs chutz la'aretz outside of Eretz Yisrael is so you'll know how to keep them when you arrive in Eretz Yisrael. Mitzvahs outside of Eretz Yisrael, he says, are all a d'Rabbanan.
They're all what?
They're all rabbinic, so that it's a chinuch, it's a matter of education, so you'll know what to do when you enter Eretz Yisrael.
It's all practice. Like mitzvahs don't count when you're
It's
outside
like
of
a
Israel?
6-year-old. A 6-year-old has no obligation to keep kosher. Because the 6-year-old is a child, he's exempt from all mitzvahs. Nonetheless, as the parents of the 6-year-old, we have to educate the child to keep kosher. But so too, we have to educate ourselves how to do mitzvahs chutz la'aretz, so that when we're in Eretz Yisrael, we'll know how to keep mitzvahs properly.
Okay, let's say that in English. Even when we don't live in the land of Israel, when we're outside of the land where mitzvahs don't actually count and they're not required, we keep them anyway so that we will know how to live as Jews keeping mitzvahs when we are in the Holy Land. And so it's assumed and understood that all Jewish people will be in the Holy Land and are from the Holy Land, and that's where mitzvahs come from and that's where mitzvahs apply.
Yes, this is the opinion of the Ramban.
Okay.
So too, we have to keep Shmita properly today so that we'll know how to keep it when Shmita again becomes Deraisa.
Deraisa.
From the Torah.
Okay.
All right. Everyone should have a good day.
Thank you.